Billionaire saw a homeless girl singing on the street, unaware she is his own daughter. A billionaire hears a small black girl singing on the street and slams on the brakes. She's barefoot, shivering, homeless. But the song freezes him in place, because it's one he wrote years ago for the woman he loved and lost. When he stops to help her, he expects gratitude. Instead, she looks up at him and says something that shatters his world. Her mother is gone. She's been sleeping wherever she can. And the truth she carries is bigger than his fortune. Now the man who owns everything must face the one thing money can't erase: years of absence. As the past comes rushing back, danger and doubt close in. Is this reunion a miracle, or a heartbreak waiting to happen? When a child needs a father, and the truth comes too late, will he step up, or walk away forever? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe, so you'll always catch the next story. The leather seat creaked as Julian shifted, his shoulders tight from 3 hours of defending quarterly projections. Outside his Mercedes, New York City moved in its usual frenetic rhythm, though the falling snow seemed to soften its edges. He loosened his silk tie, allowing himself to breathe more deeply. Estimated arrival time, Mr. Mercer? His driver, Thompson, asked from the front seat. No rush, Julian replied, his mind still churning over the board meeting. Numbers and charts flickered behind his eyes like a relentless slideshow. He'd won them over, of course. He always did. But the victory felt hollow, as most of them had lately. The car slowed to a crawl as they approached Fifth Avenue. Julian watched the snowflakes dance in the glow of street lamps, each one catching the light before joining the thin white blanket forming on the sidewalks. A crowd of holiday shoppers hurried past, clutching bags from luxury stores he'd once only dreamed of entering. Then he heard it. The sound was faint at first, barely rising above the city's ambient noise. But there was something about the melody that made Julian's chest tighten. He leaned closer to the window, his breath fogging the glass. The voice grew stronger, sweet, pure, and hauntingly familiar. Julian's hands began to tremble as the notes arranged themselves into a pattern he knew by heart. A pattern he'd created himself, sitting at an old upright piano in a cramped apartment 12 years ago. Impossible, he whispered. But there it was. His song. The one he'd written for Angela during those precious months when love seemed like enough to build a life on. The song he'd played only for her before ambition and fear had driven him away, before he'd chosen his dreams of success over what they might have had together. Through the swirling snow, he saw her, a small figure standing barefoot on the cold concrete. She couldn't have been more than 11 or 12, wearing a thin jacket that seemed inadequate against the winter chill. Her eyes were closed as she sang, small hands clasped together as if in prayer. Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. The song had been private, intimate, a secret shared between two young lovers. How could this child know it? How could she be singing it here, now, with such raw emotion? Sir, Thompson's voice cut through his thoughts. The lights changed. Should we proceed? Julian barely heard him. He couldn't tear his gaze from the girl. Her voice soared over the final bridge of the song, the part where he'd poured all his hopes and dreams into the melody, back when he still believed in such things. The same part that had made Angela cry happy tears the first time she'd heard it. The girl's shoulders shook, though whether from cold or emotion, Julian couldn't tell. She looked so small against the towering buildings, so vulnerable in the gathering darkness. Something deep within him responded to that vulnerability, a protective instinct he didn't know he possessed. Mr. Mercer, Thompson prompted again. There are cars behind us. Julian's hand found the door handle before he'd made a conscious decision to move. "Wait here," he said, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite name. The door swung open, letting in a blast of cold air and swirling snowflakes. Julian stepped out onto the street, his Italian leather shoes crunching in the fresh snow. The girl's voice pulled him forward like a physical force, each note of his long-buried song striking chords of memory and regret. He moved toward her, questions crowding his mind. Who was she? How did she know this song? And why did watching her sing it make him feel as though something long frozen inside him was beginning to thaw? The traffic light changed again, and horns blared behind him. But Julian Mercer, the man who controlled boardrooms with a glance and moved markets with a word, stood motionless on the snowy sidewalk, captivated by a barefoot girl singing a love song he'd written in another lifetime. All his carefully constructed walls, all his years of strategic distance, seemed to crumble in the face of this impossible moment. He took another step forward, drawn by a certainty he couldn't explain and a connection he didn't understand. The snow continued to fall, dusting his dark coat with white as Julian moved closer to the singing child, leaving behind the warmth and security of his car for something both terrifying and necessary. Each step felt like moving toward a truth he wasn't sure he was ready to face, but couldn't bear to ignore. The winter wind whipped around Julian as he stepped onto the slushy sidewalk, his Italian leather shoes immediately soaking through. But he barely noticed. His attention remained fixed on the small figure whose voice had drawn him from his warm sanctuary. The girl's eyes opened as his shoes crunched in the snow. They were large and dark, filled with a wariness that seemed too old for her young face. She took a small step back, her bare feet leaving tiny impressions in the dirty slush. "That song," Julian said softly, keeping his distance. "Where did you learn it?" She studied him carefully before answering, her shoulders straight despite her shivering. "My mama taught it to me. She said someone special wrote it for her." Julian's heart thundered in his chest. The girl couldn't be more than 7 or 8, her frame slight beneath an adult's coat that hung to her ankles. Dark curls peeked out from beneath a worn knit hat. "I'm Julian," he offered, trying to keep his voice steady. "What's your name?" "Nia Brooks," she replied with surprising formality, adding, "Sir," as an afterthought. "Nia," he repeated, noticing how she shifted from foot to foot in the freezing slush. "Where are your shoes?" She glanced down at her bare feet, wiggling purple-tinged toes. "They got holes. Wasn't worth wearing them anymore." Julian's throat tightened. He reached for his wallet, but Nia's expression immediately turned guarded. "I don't take money directly," she said firmly. "I sing, and if people want to leave something in my cup, that's their choice." She gestured to a paper cup near her feet, containing a few scattered coins. "How about dinner instead?" Julian suggested. No money changing hands, just a warm meal. Nia's stomach growled audibly, but uncertainty flickered across her face. "I don't go places with strangers." "Smart girl." Julian nodded approvingly. "How about this? You pick the place, somewhere public, and we stay there. I promise to keep my distance and just make sure you get something to eat." She considered this, head tilted slightly. "There's a soup kitchen at St. Mark's Church," she said finally. 3 blocks that way." She pointed down the street. "Perfect." Julian agreed. He shrugged off his wool coat, holding it out to her. "May I?" Nia hesitated before accepting, wrapping it around herself over her existing coat. The thick material dragged on the ground, but her shivering eased slightly. They walked in silence, Julian matching his pace to her small steps. He noticed how she kept careful distance between them, staying close to building walls and scanning constantly for escape routes. His driver had followed slowly in the car, but Julian waved him off with a discreet gesture. The soup kitchen occupied the basement of a small brick church. Warm light spilled from its windows, and the smell of cooking food wafted out when Nia pulled open the heavy wooden door. Inside, several long tables filled the room, about half occupied with people of various ages, spooning up bowls of soup and pulling apart pieces of bread. A grey-haired woman behind the serving counter smiled warmly at Nia. "Hello again, sweetheart. Brought a friend today?" "He's buying me dinner," Nia explained, then added quickly, "In public, where it's safe." The woman's eyes sharpened as she assessed Julian, but she nodded, approvingly at Nia's caution. "Good girl. Soup today is chicken noodle, and we've got fresh rolls." "Yes, please," Nia said softly, accepting a steaming bowl and 2 rolls on a tray. She chose a seat at the end of a table near the door, where she could see both exits. Julian got his own bowl and sat across from her, watching as she broke 1 roll into tiny pieces, methodically dipping each into the soup before eating. Despite her obvious hunger, her movements were careful and controlled. Not a drop spilled. "This is good soup," he commented, trying to ease the tension. Nia nodded, swallowing carefully before speaking. "Miss Sarah makes it from scratch. She says real food feeds your soul, not just your stomach." "Miss Sarah sounds very wise," Julian said, watching as Nia started on her second roll, still maintaining that deliberate pace despite trembling hands that betrayed her hunger. The ache in his chest intensified as he observed her. This small, dignified child who sang his song, on frozen streets and ate soup kitchen meals with the manners of a princess. Something about her tugged at him, beyond the mystery of how she knew that melody. Perhaps it was the careful way she held herself, or the old soul wisdom in her eyes. She finished every drop of soup, using the last bit of roll to wipe the bowl clean. "Thank you for dinner," she said formally, pushing back from the table. "Wait," Julian said quickly, then softened his tone when she tensed. "At least let me get you some shoes. Please." "Why?" Nia asked directly, studying his face. "Why do you care?" Julian considered his answer carefully, knowing instinctively that this child would spot any insincerity. "Because it's freezing outside, and no one should have to walk barefoot in the snow. Because that song you were singing, it matters to me. And because sometimes people just want to help, with no strings attached." Nia's gaze remained steady on his face for a long moment. Finally, she spoke quietly. "My mama said to be careful of help that seems too good to be true." "Your mama sounds very wise, too," Julian said gently. "But I promise you, Nia, no strings, no tricks, just shoes." The ache in his chest grew sharper as he watched her internal struggle play across her face, need warring with caution, hope with hard-learned suspicion. He found himself holding his breath until she gave a tiny nod. "Miss Sarah knows my size," she said softly. "She keeps a box of donations." Julian watched as she spooned up the last drops of soup, his heart heavy with questions he didn't yet dare to ask. Who was this child? How did she know that song? And why did watching her eat with such careful dignity make him want to simultaneously buy her a feast and cry? The soup kitchen hummed with quiet activity as Julian sat across from Nia at a worn wooden table. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over the simple space, but somehow the girl made even this humble setting feel important. She ate her soup, carefully, blowing on each spoonful with practiced patience. "Is it good?" Julian asked softly, his own bowl untouched. Nia nodded, dabbing her mouth with a paper napkin. "Yes, sir, thank you." She carefully tore off a piece of bread and wrapped it in another napkin, tucking it into her coat pocket. Julian's throat tightened as he watched her save food for later. "You don't have to save it. We can get more if you're still hungry." "It's okay," she said, her small fingers smoothing the napkin's edges. "Sometimes the kitchen's closed when I get hungry." The words hit Julian like a physical blow. He noticed how her eyes constantly scanned the room, how she sat with her back to the wall. These were the habits of someone who had learned to be careful, to stay alert. "Nia," he said gently, "can you tell me about your mum?" Her spoon paused halfway to her mouth. For a moment she just stared into her soup, as if gathering strength. "Mommy got sick real fast," she said finally, her voice steady but soft. "The doctors tried everything, but she went to heaven 3 months ago." Julian's hands gripped his knees under the table. "And there's no one taking care of you. Mummy's friends tried, but they have their own families." Nia's shoulders lifted in a small shrug. "And Grandma died before I was born. It's just been me and Mummy for a long time." She spoke with such composure that it made Julian's heart ache even more. No child should have to be this strong, this matter-of-fact about being alone. "That song you were singing earlier," Julian said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Did your mum teach you that?" For the first time, a real smile touched Nia's face. "Yes, sir. It was her favorite. She sang it to me every night before bed." The smile faded slightly. She said someone special wrote it for her when they were young. The man who loved her first? Julian's pulse quickened. Did she tell you anything else about that man?" Nia set down her spoon and looked at him directly for the first time. Her eyes, so much like Lillian's, searched his face with an intensity that seemed far beyond her 7 years. "Mommy said if I ever met you," she whispered, each word falling like a stone into still water, "I should tell you, you're my daddy." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Julian gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady himself as memories crashed over him. Lillian's smile, their last fight, the way she'd walked away while he was too proud to follow. With trembling hands, Nia reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. The edges were worn smooth from handling, the creases deep and permanent. She unfolded it carefully, like a precious treasure, and placed it on the table between them. Julian stared at the image, feeling as if all the air had been sucked from his lungs. There they were, so young and happy, him and Lillian, sitting at his old piano. His arms were around her waist, and they were both laughing at something long forgotten. He remembered the day perfectly. It was when he'd first played her the song, their song. The photograph blurred as tears filled his eyes. He blinked them back, not wanting to frighten Nia, but his hands shook as he touched the edge of the photo. "She kept this," he whispered. "All these years. Mummy said it was from the happiest time." Nia explained quietly. "Before you got busy with your dreams." She touched the picture gently. "She used to tell me stories about how you played piano and wrote songs. She said that's where I got my voice from." Julian couldn't speak. The weight of everything he'd missed, Lillian's pregnancy, Nia's birth, 7 years of his daughter's life, pressed down on his chest until he could barely breathe. He looked at this small, brave girl who had been singing his song on a cold street corner and saw both Lillian's strength and his own features reflected back at him. "I'm so sorry," he finally managed to say, his voice rough with emotion. "I didn't know. I should have been there. I should have—" "Mommy said you didn't know about me," Nia said simply. She said sometimes grown-ups make hard choices because they think they're doing the right thing. She pulled the photograph back toward herself, folding it carefully along its well-worn creases. "She wasn't mad at you. She just wanted me to know who you were if I ever found you." The bitter wind whipped around them as Julian guided Nia out of the soup kitchen. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, struggling to process the weight of her revelation. The photograph in his pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric of his suit. "I need to make a quick call," he said softly, watching as Nia hugged herself against the cold. She nodded, her small frame swaying slightly with exhaustion. Miles answered on the first ring. "Sir." "Miles, I need a hotel room. Something clean and comfortable, but nothing flashy. Near—" Julian glanced at the street sign. "Near 4th and Madison. As soon as possible." There was a brief pause. "Is everything all right, Mr. Mercer?" "No," Julian said quietly, watching Nia stamp her feet to keep warm. "But it will be. Just handle this personally, please." "Of course, sir. I'll text you the details within 10 minutes. Julian ended the call and turned back to Nia. Her eyes, so much like Lillian's, watched him with a mixture of hope and wariness that made his chest ache. "Nia," he began carefully, kneeling down to her level despite the wet sidewalk soaking through his expensive pants. "I'm going to make sure you have a warm, safe place to stay tonight. Would that be okay?" She studied him for a long moment. "Are you mad at my mommy?" Her voice was small but steady. "For not telling you about me?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Julian had to take a deep breath before he could answer. "No, sweetheart, I'm not mad at your mother." He ran a hand through his hair, searching for words a 7-year-old could understand. "The truth is, I made some bad choices when I was younger. I loved your mother very much, but I chose my work over her, over everything else." Nia's face scrunched up in thought. "Mommy said you had big dreams." "I did," Julian agreed, his throat tight. "But I didn't know those dreams would cost me so much. I didn't know about you, Nia. If I had—" His phone buzzed with the hotel details from Miles. Julian stood up, his knees protesting the cold concrete. "Let's get you somewhere warm, okay? We can talk more once you're comfortable." The hotel Miles had chosen was 3 blocks away, a modest but well-maintained establishment with friendly staff who didn't bat an eye at the odd pair they made, a man in a $1,000 suit and a barefoot little girl in a threadbare coat. Julian got Nia settled in a clean, cozy room with 2 queen beds. He ordered hot chocolate and sandwiches from room service, made sure she had fresh towels, for a warm bath, and promised to return first thing in the morning. "You're coming back?" Nia asked, clutching the room key like a lifeline. "I promise," Julian said firmly. "I'll bring you some new clothes, too. Is there anything specific you'd like?" She hesitated before whispering, "Purple is my favorite color." The drive back to his penthouse passed in a blur. Julian barely registered the familiar luxury of his home as he sank into his leather armchair, the same photograph still burning in his pocket. With trembling fingers, he pulled it out. The image showed a younger version of himself at the piano, head thrown back in laughter as Lillian leaned against him. Her smile was radiant, her eyes full of love. Julian remembered that day with painful clarity. They'd spent hours writing music together, dreaming of the future. Memory after memory crashed over him. Their last fight echoed in his mind. Lillian begging him to slow down, to remember what really mattered. He'd told her she was holding him back, that she didn't understand his vision. The hurt in her eyes should have stopped him, but he'd been too blind with ambition to see it. She must have already known she was pregnant when she left. Julian pressed his palms against his eyes, fighting back tears. All these years he'd told himself that sacrificing their relationship had been necessary for his success. Now, looking at his empty penthouse with its perfect views and pristine furniture, he wondered what success really meant. The right thing to do was clear, even if it terrified him. Before he could claim any right to be in Nia's life, he needed to confirm everything legally and properly. Not because he doubted. One look in her eyes had been enough to know the truth. But because she deserved better than half measures and uncertainty. He picked up his phone again. "Miles, I need you to clear my schedule for tomorrow. And I need you to find me the best family lawyer in the city. We have some work to do." After hanging up, Julian walked to his piano, a grand instrument that hadn't been played in years. His fingers found the melody Nia had been singing, the song he'd written for Lillian so long ago. The notes filled his empty home, carrying all the weight of his regret and hope for redemption. He played until his fingers ached, until the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now, the music said everything his heart couldn't find words for. The morning sun cast long shadows across Julian's office as he paced, waiting for Karen Holt to arrive. His normally pristine desk was cluttered with hastily gathered documents, birth certificates, financial records, and a small photo of Lillian he'd kept buried in a drawer for years. A knock at the door made him jump. "Come in," he called, straightening his tie. Karen Holt entered with measured steps, her practical navy suit and minimal jewelry reflecting her no-nonsense approach. She carried a worn leather briefcase that had clearly seen countless similar meetings. "Mr. Mercer," she said, extending her hand. "I understand we have an urgent situation to discuss." Julian gestured to the chairs by his desk. "Please sit. And yes, it's about a 7-year-old girl named Nia Brooks. He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I have reason to believe she's my daughter." Karen's expression remained neutral as she pulled out a notepad. "Tell me everything, starting with how you found her." Julian described the previous evening, the song, the soup kitchen, the photograph. His words tumbled out faster than usual, his carefully maintained control slipping. "She's been alone since her mother died, living on the streets. I need to make this right, but I want to do it properly, legally. I appreciate that approach." Karen said, making notes, "But I need to be clear. Situations like this are complex. Your public profile adds another layer of difficulty. There will be scrutiny." Julian nodded. "I understand. I want a DNA test done immediately." "That's a good first step." Karen agreed, though her tone remained cautious. "But Mr. Mercer, I need to ask, why didn't you know about Nia before?" The question hit him like a physical blow. "I chose my career over her mother, Lillian." His voice caught on her name. "She left, and I let her go. I never knew she was pregnant." Karen studied him, her experienced eyes taking in every detail of his response. "And now that you do know? I want to help her, protect her, be her father if she'll let me." Julian ran a hand through his hair. "But I know I can't just sweep in and claim her. She's been through too much." "Good, that awareness will help." Karen pulled out several forms. "We'll need to document everything. Your relationship with Lillian Brooks, the circumstances of your separation, your current situation." "And Mr. Mercer?" She fixed him with a steady gaze. "The media will get wind of this. Are you prepared for that?" Julian's jaw tightened. "My reputation isn't what matters here. Nia's welfare comes first." Something in Karen's expression softened slightly. "That's the right answer. Now, there's a church where Nia's been staying sometimes?" "Yes, I'm heading there next. Blessed Hope Community Church." The Reverend knew Lillian. After finishing with Karen, Julian drove through modest neighborhoods until he reached the small brick church. Its worn steps and carefully tended flower beds spoke of long service to the community. Reverend Samuel Green met him at the door, a tall man with kind eyes and grey-streaked hair. "Mr. Mercer," he said warmly, "I've been expecting you. Nia called this morning." Inside his office, the Reverend offered Julian a cup of coffee in a chipped mug. Lillian was a faithful member of our congregation, he said, settling into a well-worn armchair. She sang in our choir. Her voice— He shook his head. Like angels weeping and rejoicing at once. Nia inherited that gift. The song she was singing. Julian said quietly. I wrote it for Lillian when we were young. Ah, yes. When Morning Breaks. The Reverend nodded. Lillian sang it often. She never spoke badly of you, you know. Just said you had different dreams. Julian stared into his coffee. I was wrong. My dreams were empty. Perhaps. Reverend Green said gently. But what matters now is what you do with this moment. Lillian raised that child with love and faith, even when times were hard. She worked 3 jobs sometimes, but never missed Sunday service, never lost her smile. Why didn't she tell me? Julian's voice cracked. I would have helped. The Reverend leaned forward. Would you have? The man you were then? The question hung in the air, heavy with truth. Julian closed his eyes. No, he whispered. I wouldn't have understood what mattered. And now I'd give everything I own just to undo one decision. Reverend Green smiled. Then perhaps you're ready for the gift Lillian left you, the chance to know your daughter. Later that afternoon, Julian sat in a sterile medical office, watching as a technician swabbed the inside of his cheek for the DNA test. Nia had been there earlier, brave and quiet as always. Now, alone with his thoughts, Julian found himself doing something he hadn't done since childhood, praying. It wasn't a formal prayer, just a whispered plea into the silence. Please let me find the truth. Please help me be worthy of her trust. Please. His voice faded, but his heart continued reaching out, searching for answers beyond balance sheets and boardrooms, beyond the carefully constructed walls of his success. Somewhere in the city his daughter was waiting, not for his wealth or his name, but for something far more precious, a father's love that would stay. Julian's phone vibrated against his desk early Wednesday morning. Karen Holt's name flashed across the screen, making his heart skip. He'd been staring at spreadsheets for hours, but hadn't absorbed a single number. His hand trembled slightly as he answered. Mr. Mercer. Karen's voice was steady and professional. I have the DNA results. Julian closed his eyes, gripping the edge of his desk. Yes? The test confirms it. You are Nia's biological father. Karen paused, letting the words sink in. The probability is 99.9%. The office around him seemed to blur. Julian slumped back in his chair, a mix of emotions washing over him, relief, joy, and pure terror. This wasn't just about proving a connection anymore. This was about being responsible for a whole human being. A little girl who had already lost so much. Mr. Mercer, are you still there? Yes, sorry. He cleared his throat. What happens next? Well, we need to discuss custody arrangements. Nia is currently in a temporary foster placement. It's a good facility, very experienced with children who've experienced trauma. Would you like to visit her? Today? Julian glanced at his schedule, packed with meetings and conference calls. Without hesitation, he pressed the intercom. Miles, clear my afternoon. Of course. Karen continued. This is just the beginning. There will be home studies, background checks, and we'll need to establish a transition plan that prioritizes Nia's emotional well-being. I understand. Julian stood, already reaching for his coat. Text me the facility's address. I'll head there after lunch. Before leaving his office, Julian made an unexpected stop. Instead of heading to the luxury children's boutique his assistant had recommended, he drove to a practical department store. He walked past the glittering toys and fancy electronics, straight to the winter clothing section. He selected a sturdy pair of boots in Nia's size, thick socks, and a warm winter coat that wouldn't draw attention at school. The foster facility was a plain brick building with cheerful curtains in the windows. Children's artwork decorated the hallways, and the smell of recent lunch, mac and cheese, lingered in the air. A staff member led Julian to a small visiting room with comfortable chairs and a low table. When Nia entered, she looked different from the shivering girl he'd met on the street. Her hair was neatly braided, and she wore clean clothes that fit properly. But her eyes still held that careful watchfulness that made his chest ache. "Hello, Mr. Mercer," she said politely, perching on the edge of her chair. The formal address stung a little, but Julian understood. He couldn't expect her to jump into calling him Dad just because of a DNA test. Trust had to be earned, especially with a child who'd learned the hard way that adults could disappear. "Hi, Nia." He gestured to the shopping bags. "I brought you some things for the cold weather." Her eyes flickered to the bags, but she didn't move to open them. "Thank you. That's very kind." Julian pulled out the boots first. "I noticed you didn't have proper shoes the other night. These should keep your feet warm and dry." Nia reached out slowly, running her fingers over the practical brown boots. "They look sturdy," she said quietly. "They are. And there's a coat too. Nothing fancy, but it's warm." He placed the coat on the table between them, letting her examine it at her own pace. She nodded, her small hands touching the thick material. "My old coat." She hesitated. "It was my mom's. Too big, but it still smelled like her." Julian's throat tightened. "We can keep that one too. Sometimes it's good to have things that remind us of people we love." Nia looked up at him then, really looked at him, her dark eyes serious. "Did you love her?" "My mum?" Julian took a deep breath, knowing this child deserved nothing but honesty. "Yes, I did. But I was young and scared of failing at my dreams. I chose wrong when I left. If I'd known about you—" "You might have stayed?" Her voice was very small. "I would have stayed," Julian said, firmly. "Not just because of duty, but because having a family, that would have been the better dream." Nia smoothed the coat's sleeve, considering this. "Ms. Holt says you're my father, that the test proved it." "Yes." "And you want me to live with you?" "Eventually, yes, but only when you're ready. We can take it slow, get to know each other first." She nodded, relief visible in her shoulders. "I'd like that, taking it slow." She picked up one of the boots, examining the sturdy sole. "My mum always said rushing into things was like trying to force a flower to bloom. You just end up with broken petals." Julian smiled, recognizing Lillian's wisdom in those words. "Your mum was a smart woman." "The smartest." Nia's voice wavered slightly. She cleared her throat and sat up straighter. "Thank you for the boots and coat, Mr. Mercer." That formal Mr. Mercer again, but Julian accepted it. Love couldn't be rushed or demanded. It had to grow naturally, like Lillian's flower. His job now wasn't to push or hurry. It was simply to be present, to show up, to prove through actions rather than words that he could be trusted. The visit ended with Nia trying on the boots, a small smile appearing when they fit perfectly. As Julian prepared to leave, she spoke up once more. "Will you come back?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "I'll come tomorrow, if that's okay with you." She nodded, her fingers still resting on the new coat. "That would be nice, Mr. Mercer." Walking back to his car, Julian felt the weight of reality settling fully on his shoulders. He had a daughter, a brilliant, careful, wounded daughter who needed more than his money or influence. She needed his time, his patience, his steady presence. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in years, he was absolutely certain about what mattered most. His phone buzzed with messages about missed meetings and pending decisions, but Julian barely noticed. Today he'd gotten something right. not by wielding power or making demands, but by showing up with warm boots and an open heart. It was a small step, but in the right direction. The morning after receiving the DNA results, Julian stood outside the foster facility, his breath visible in the cold air. He'd arrived early, as he promised Nia he would, carrying a small paper bag from a local bakery. The security guard recognized him now, buzzing him in with a friendly nod. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer." Ms. Thompson, the facility supervisor, greeted him. "Nia's just finishing breakfast." Julian waited in the common room, watching through the window as other children played in the yard. His daughter appeared a few minutes later, wearing the new coat he'd brought her yesterday. She approached carefully, maintaining the measured distance she always kept between them. "Good morning, Mr. Mercer," she said softly, her hands clasped in front of her. "Good morning, Nia. I brought some chocolate croissants. Your social worker said it was okay?" Her eyes lit up slightly, though she tried to hide it. "Thank you." They sat at a small table, and Julian watched as she took small, careful bites of the pastry, saving half for later, just as she had done with every meal he'd seen her eat. "I'll be here tomorrow too," he said, "and the day after that. Every day, if that's okay with you." Nia nodded, studying him with those serious eyes that reminded him so much of Lillian. The next day, Julian arrived at the same time, this time bringing children's books he remembered from his own childhood. He found Nia in the facility's small library, humming that familiar melody, his melody, while organizing books on a shelf. "Would you like to read together?" he asked. She considered this, then nodded. They spent an hour with Bridge to Terabithia, taking turns reading pages. When Nia struggled with a word, Julian waited patiently, letting her work it out herself before offering help. On the third day, Julian discovered Nia's evening routine. He arrived later, just before dinner, and watched from the doorway as she knelt beside her bed. "Dear God," she whispered, eyes closed tight. "Thank you for the food today and for keeping me safe. Please watch over Mommy in heaven and—" She paused, opening one eye to peek at Julian before closing it again. "Please help Mr. Mercer know what to do." The simple prayer squeezed Julian's heart. During his fourth daily visit, Nia was having what Ms. Thompson called an anxious day. Julian found her sitting in a corner of the common room, singing quietly to herself. Not his song this time, but a hymn he vaguely remembered from childhood. "That's beautiful," he said, sitting nearby but not too close. "Mommy said singing helps when things feel scary," she explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "What feels scary today?" Nia shrugged, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. "Sometimes I forget what Mommy's voice sounded like." Julian sat with her in silence for a long while, letting her sing until her shoulders relaxed. On the fifth day, Reverend Green called Julian to the church. "We found something you should see," he said over the phone. The church was quiet when Julian arrived, sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. Reverend Green led him to his office, where a cardboard box sat on his desk. "These were Lillian's things," the Reverend explained. "She left them here for safekeeping when she got sick, asked us to hold them for Nia." Julian's hands trembled as he opened the box. Inside were photos, a worn Bible, and a stack of envelopes tied with a faded ribbon. Each envelope was addressed to him, but none had been mailed. "She wrote to you often," Reverend Green said softly. "But she never sent them. Said some things needed to wait for the right time." That night, Julian sat in his penthouse study, the letters spread before him on his desk. His fingers traced Lillian's handwriting, so familiar even after all these years. He opened the first, letter dated 7 years ago. "Dear Julian, I'm carrying our child. I've tried to tell you for weeks, but you're always in meetings. always focused on the next deal, the next acquisition. Yesterday, you missed our dinner again, the one where I planned to tell you everything. Your assistant said you were in Singapore, closing another merger. I watch you building your empire, and I see your brilliance, your drive. But I also see the cost. You're becoming someone who measures everything in profit and loss, even love. I can't let our child grow up believing they have to earn their father's attention. Julian's vision blurred. He opened another letter, this one from 6 years ago. Our daughter has your gift for music. She hums constantly, even in her sleep. Sometimes I teach her your song, the one you wrote for me, and I see you in her smile. I wonder if you'd recognize your melody in her voice. Letter after letter revealed Lillian's heart, her struggles as a single mother, her unwavering faith, her determination to protect Nia while keeping Julian's memory positive in their daughter's mind. The final letter, dated just months before her death, broke him completely. I know now I should have told you, not for my sake, but for Nia's. She deserves to know her father, and you deserve to know this amazing child. I pray that somehow God will bring you together when the time is right. And when that happens, Julian, please remember, love isn't earned like money or success. It's given freely, like grace. Julian set the letter down, his chest tight with grief and regret. The city lights twinkled outside his window, but he barely saw them. All he could see was the cost of his choices, the years lost, the love sacrificed on the altar of ambition, the lonely little girl singing his song on a cold street corner. For the first time in years he wept openly, mourning not just Lillian's death, but the life they might have had, the father he should have been. The letters scattered across his desk told a story of love that waited patiently, of faith that endured, and of a second chance he never knew he needed until now. The winter sunlight streamed through the social services office windows as Julian checked his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. He smoothed his tie nervously, a habit from countless business meetings that felt strangely out of place now. Remember, Mr. Mercer, Karen Holt said, reviewing the paperwork on her desk. These supervised visits are meant to help you and Nia build a natural relationship. No extravagant outings or expensive gifts, just regular father-daughter time. Julian nodded, his throat tight. I understand. Simple activities, focused on getting to know each other. When Nia walked in wearing a plain blue sweater and jeans, her hair neatly braided, Julian's heart skipped. She carried her school bag, clutching the strap with both hands. Hi, Mr. Mercer, she said softly. Hi, Nia. Would you like to get some lunch? She nodded, and they headed to a small diner nearby. Julian watched as Nia studied the children's menu with serious concentration. What looks good to you? He asked. Can I have the grilled cheese? Her voice was hesitant. And maybe apple juice? Of course. Julian smiled, relieved at such a straightforward request. He'd spent hours researching child-appropriate restaurants, terrified of making a mistake. Over the next few days, their routine settled into a careful rhythm. Julian would pick Nia up after school, help with homework at the library, and share simple meals. He discovered that math made her forehead scrunch in frustration, but reading brought out her dimples. That's not quite right, he said one afternoon, looking at her division problem. Let me show you. I know. Nia interrupted quietly. Mommy taught me to check my work twice. She erased carefully and started over, while Julian bit his tongue, learning to step back. On Thursday, Nia mentioned choir, practice at the church. Would you like to come listen? She asked, not quite meeting his eyes. The old brick church was warm and welcoming, its wooden pews worn smooth by years of faithful attendance. Julian sat in the back, watching Nia join the other children near the altar. An elderly woman with silver hair sat at the piano, her fingers moving with graceful certainty across the keys. When Nia's clear voice rose above the others, Julian closed his eyes. The same sweet tone that had stopped him on that snowy street now filled the sacred space, carrying memories of another voice from years ago. After practice, as the other children filed out, the pianist approached Julian. Her kind eyes crinkled at the corners as she smiled. "I'm Eleanor Finch," she said. "I couldn't help but notice how intently you were listening. You're Nia's father, aren't you?" Julian stood, surprised. "Yes, How did you know?" "I knew Lillian well," Eleanor said softly. "She played here often, and that song Nia just sang. I remember when Lillian first shared it with me, years ago. She said it was written by someone who understood the language of her heart." Julian's chest tightened. "I wrote it for her when we were young. I never knew she kept it." Eleanor nodded, her eyes gentle. Lillian had a gift for seeing the best in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves. She used to say that God's timing was perfect, and that someday, when hearts were ready, love would find its way home. Nia approached them shyly, her choir folder hugged to her chest. Eleanor turned to her with a warm smile. "Your mother would be so proud of how beautifully you're singing, dear one." Tears shimmered in Nia's eyes, but she smiled. "Thank you, Miss Eleanor." Julian noticed the piano music still open on the stand. "Would you mind if I—" He gestured toward the piano. Eleanor's face brightened. "Please do." He sat at the bench, fingers hovering over the keys. The melody came back to him easily, the same song that had brought him and Nia together on that winter street. After a few measures, Nia's voice joined in, tentative at first, then growing stronger. As they made music together, Julian felt something shift in the space between them. The notes wove a bridge across years of absence, across hurt and hope, across all the words they didn't know how to say yet. Eleanor watched from the side, her hands clasped together. When the last note faded, she whispered, "Music has a way of speaking truth that words sometimes can't reach." Nia looked up at Julian, really looked at him, for the first time since they'd met. "Mommy said you taught her this song on an old piano in the college music room." Julian nodded, his voice rough with emotion. "We used to sneak in there late at night to practice. The security guard pretended not to see us." A small smile tugged at Nia's lips. "She said you would play until your fingers got too cold to move." "That's right," Julian said softly. "But your mother, she never wanted to stop. She said music was like prayer. It kept her warm from the inside." Eleanor touched Nia's shoulder gently. "Your mother never lost faith in love's power to heal, sweet girl. She believed that even the hardest hearts could learn to sing again." Julian's fingers traced the piano keys lightly, remembering Lillian's patient teaching, her gentle insistence that music wasn't about perfection, but about truth. He looked at Nia, seeing shadows of her mother's grace in the way she stood, in how she held music close like a treasured secret. "Would you like to learn this song properly?" he asked. "I could teach you the harmony parts." Nia's eyes lit up, though she tried to hide her excitement. "Yes, please, Mr. Mercer." "May I show you now?" She nodded, settling beside him on the piano bench. Julian began to play again, this time breaking down the chord progressions, explaining each part as Lillian had once explained them to him. The afternoon light slanted through the stained glass windows, painting rainbow patterns across the piano keys as father and daughter bent over them together, finding their way through melody and memory, one note at a time. The morning light filtered through sheer curtains in the modest bedroom Julian had prepared. No elaborate decorations or expensive furnishings filled the space, just warm colors, soft blankets, and a small desk by the window. He stood in the doorway, taking in the simple comfort of it all. "What do you think?" he asked Miles, his assistant, who was making notes on his tablet. "It's different from your usual style, sir." Miles glanced around at the pale yellow walls and handmade quilt spread across the twin bed. "But it feels right." Julian nodded, running his hand along the wooden bookshelf he'd assembled himself. "She needs a home, not a showcase." He'd specifically chosen books Nia had mentioned during their visits, adventure stories and poetry collections that made her eyes light up. A small keyboard sat in the corner, nothing fancy like the grand piano downstairs, but perfect for practicing. Above it hung a framed photo of Lillian holding a toddler Nia, both laughing at something beyond the camera's view. Julian had found it in the box of belongings from the church. His phone buzzed. Karen Holt's name flashed on the screen. "Julian, we need to talk. There's been a development." 20 minutes later, Julian sat in Karen's office, staring at the legal documents spread across her desk. Vernon Brooks. The name meant nothing to him. Lillian's second cousin. Karen explained, her face tight with concern. "He's filed for custody, claiming blood relation and questioning your fitness as a parent." Julian's stomach clenched. "I've never even heard of him. Where was he when Nia was homeless?" "That's part of his argument. He says he only recently learned of Lillian's death and Nia's situation." Karen leaned forward. "Mr. Brooks is well connected in local politics. He's already talking to the press." Julian's phone buzzed again. News alerts. His heart sank as he read the headlines. "Billionaire's sudden interest in long-lost daughter raises questions," and "Local man fights to keep family together against corporate giant." "They're painting me as some kind of—" Julian's voice cracked. "Like I'm trying to buy her." "We knew there might be challenges," Karen said gently. "Your wealth, your past absence, these things can be twisted. But Julian, what matters is what Nia needs." That afternoon, during their scheduled visit at the foster facility, Julian noticed Nia was quieter than usual. She sat at the small table, pushing crayons around without drawing anything. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" he asked, sitting beside her. Nia kept her eyes down. "I heard Miss Thompson talking to someone about court and judges." Her small fingers gripped a blue crayon tightly. "They said someone wants to take me away from you." Julian's heart ached. "Nia, look at me. Please." He waited until she raised her eyes. "Whatever happens, I'm not giving up. You deserve to know that." "But what if they make me go?" Her voice trembled. "What if—" The door opened, and voices carried from the hallway. "As her blood relative, I have every right to see her." A man's sharp tone cut through the air. "Mr. Brooks, this isn't the appropriate time." Miss Thompson's protest was cut short as Vernon Brooks strode into the room. He was tall, well-dressed, with Lillian's dark complexion but none of her warmth. His eyes locked onto Nia. "There's my little cousin. I've been so worried about you." Nia shrank back in her chair, pressing closer to Julian. Vernon's smile tightened as he noticed this. "Mr. Brooks," Julian said evenly, standing. "This is a scheduled visitation time." "Oh yes, the famous Mr. Mercer." Vernon's tone dripped with false politeness. "Tell me, how many millions did it cost to suddenly develop a conscience?" "That's enough!" Karen appeared in the doorway, her usually calm demeanor stern. "Mr. Brooks, you need to leave. Now." As Vernon was escorted out, his voice carried back. "The courts will see through this. Money can't buy family." That evening, Julian sat with Nia in the facility's small music room. The piano stood silent, untouched. Would you like to practice the new song? He suggested gently. Nia shook her head, hugging herself. I don't feel like singing anymore. That's okay. Julian fought to keep his voice steady. We can just sit. Mr. Mercer. Her small voice cracked. Are they going to take me away? Julian wanted to promise her the world, guarantee her safety, but Lillian's letters had taught him the importance of honest love over empty promises. I don't know what will happen, he admitted, but I know I'll fight for you, and I'll always be honest with you. Nia nodded, her eyes filling with tears she tried to hide. The piano keys remained untouched, her voice, usually so free and clear, trapped behind fear and uncertainty. They sat together in the growing darkness, father and daughter, both afraid of another loss neither could bear. Julian stood at the window of his office, watching dark clouds gather over the city. The weathered manila folder on his desk contained yet another set of legal documents, the third revision this week. His lawyer's voice droned on behind him. Mr. Mercer, we need to push back harder against Vernon Brooks. His claim is weak, but he's painting you as an absent father who's trying to buy his way into parenthood. We should highlight his own questionable background. Julian turned sharply. No, I won't destroy anyone's reputation to win this. With all due respect, sir, being noble won't help you keep your daughter. The word daughter still caught in Julian's chest like a hook. 7 days had passed since Vernon Brooks filed his custody petition. 7 days of mounting pressure, media speculation, and watching Nia's eyes grow more distant with each visit. He checked his watch. 2:30. Time for his afternoon visit with Nia at the temporary care facility. We're done here, Julian said firmly. No attack strategies. Find another way. The drive to the facility felt longer than usual. Rain began to spatter against the windows as his car wound through traffic. Julian clutched a small paper bag containing Nia's favorite sandwich, peanut butter and banana on wheat bread, cut diagonally just as she liked it. Miss Karen met him at the entrance, her normally warm expression tight with concern. She's having a difficult day, Mr. Mercer. Hasn't spoken since breakfast. Julian found Nia sitting cross-legged on her bed, staring at the wall. Her small shoulders were hunched forward, making her look even tinier than usual. She didn't turn when he entered. I brought your favorite, he said softly, setting the bag on her nightstand. Would you like to share it with me? Silence stretched between them. Julian sat carefully on the edge of the bed, maintaining the distance she seemed to need. It's okay if you don't want to talk. We can just sit together. Minutes ticked by. The sandwich remained untouched. Outside, rain drummed steadily against the windows. Nia, Julian said gently, I know things are confusing right now, but I promise you, don't promise. Her voice was barely a whisper. Grown-ups always promise things will be okay. The words struck Julian like physical blows. He thought of Lillian's letters, of all the promises he'd broken years ago without even knowing their weight. You're right, he admitted. I can't promise everything will be okay, but I can promise that I'll keep trying my best for you every single day. Nia's shoulders trembled slightly. Still, she wouldn't look at him. When visiting hours ended at 5 o'clock, Julian left with a heavy heart. He was halfway to his car when Miss Karen came running out. Mr. Mercer, she's gone! Julian spun around. What? We just did room checks. Her window was open. She must have slipped out while we were changing shifts. Panic gripped Julian's chest. Call the police. I'm going to look for her. Rain was falling steadily now as Julian ran back to his car. He knew Nia's usual spots, the church, the soup kitchen, the park where she used to sing. But as darkness crept in and the storm intensified, each location turned up empty. 8 o'clock, 9, 10. Julian's clothes were soaked through as he searched street after street. His phone buzzed constantly with updates from the police, Miss Karen, and his security team. No sign of her anywhere. Near midnight, he found himself back at the intersection where he'd first heard her singing. The same melody that had stopped him in his tracks that day now haunted him with its absence. Wind whipped rain against his face as he stood there, remembering another night years ago when he'd let someone else he loved walk away into the darkness. "Please," he whispered, though he wasn't sure who he was talking to. God, perhaps, or Lillian's memory, or the night itself. "Please don't let me lose her too." Thunder rolled overhead. Somewhere in the vast, rain-drenched city, his daughter was alone and afraid. And just like the night Lillian had left, carrying their unborn child away from his blind ambition, Julian had no one to blame but himself. He pulled out his phone again, dialing Miss Karen's number with trembling fingers. The search would continue through the night, through the storm, through whatever it took. Because this time, Julian Mercer wasn't letting go. The winter wind whipped around the tall buildings, carrying snowflakes that danced in the glow of streetlights. Julian Mercer's expensive shoes crunched against fresh snow as he hurried down familiar sidewalks, his heart pounding with each step. The sound of traffic faded into the background as panic gripped his chest. "Nia!" he called out, his voice echoing off concrete walls. Several passers-by turned to look, but none were the small figure he desperately sought. His mind raced with possibilities. Had she gone back to the church? The soup kitchen? But something pulled him forward, toward that first street corner where her voice had stopped him in his tracks just weeks ago. The memory of that moment felt both recent and distant, like a dream that changed everything. Julian loosened his tie, no longer caring about his appearance or the biting cold. Shop windows glowed with warm light as evening settled in, but the streets grew emptier. His breath came out in visible puffs as he quickened his pace. "Please," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was praying or just hoping. "Please let her be safe." The intersection ahead looked different in the growing darkness, but Julian recognized it immediately. His footsteps slowed as he approached, and that's when he heard it. Soft and trembling, but unmistakable. Nia's voice carried through the cold air, singing their song. She stood exactly where he'd first seen her, but this time her feet weren't bare. She wore the warm boots he'd bought her, and the proper winter coat, but her small shoulders shook with more than just cold. Her eyes were closed tight as she sang, fingers clasped together as if in prayer. Julian stopped several feet away, not wanting to startle her. The melody wrapped around him like a familiar embrace, bringing back memories of writing it late at night, young and full of dreams, thinking of Lillian. Now their daughter sang it, and the weight of all his mistakes pressed down on his shoulders. "Nia," he said softly when she finished the last note. She opened her eyes but didn't run. Instead, she looked at him with a mixture of fear and hope that made his chest ache. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I needed to think." Julian moved slowly, kneeling down in the snow beside her. He didn't care that the wetness soaked through his expensive suit pants, or that people walked around them, staring. None of that mattered anymore. "I'm the one who's sorry," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been sorry for so long, and I didn't even know how much I had to be sorry for." Nia watched him carefully, the way she always did, measuring his words against some internal scale of truth. "Are you mad at me?" "No, sweetheart, never." Julian shook his head, snow settling on his dark hair. "I'm mad at myself. I was young and stupid, and I thought success meant more than love. I left your mother because I was scared of not being enough, scared of failing. But that's no excuse. The man at court said you just want me because you're rich now, Nia said quietly, voicing the fear that had been haunting her. Julian felt tears stinging his eyes, but didn't try to hide them. I want you because you're my daughter, because when I hear you sing, I hear your mother's heart and mine together in perfect harmony. Because every day I spend with you teaches me what really matters in life. He took a deep breath, watching snowflakes settle on her dark eyelashes. I know I haven't earned the right to be called your dad. Maybe I never will. But I promise you this, I'm not going anywhere. Whether you ever want to call me father or not, I'll be here. Not because I have to be, but because I choose to be. Nia's lower lip trembled slightly. What if they take me away? Then I'll fight for you the right way, with truth and patience and love. No tricks, no buying people off, no hurting anyone else to get what I want. That's not the kind of father you deserve. Mommy said you were kind, Nia said softly. She said you just forgot how to be sometimes. Julian's heart squeezed at Lillian's gentle assessment of him, so much more generous than he deserved. Your mother was very wise and very forgiving. I miss her, Nia admitted, her voice catching. I know you do. I miss her too, even though I lost her years ago through my own foolishness. Julian held out his hand, palm up. An offer, not a demand. I can't replace her. I won't try to. But maybe we can help each other remember her and learn to be a different kind of family. Snow continued to fall around them, soft and steady, creating a quiet bubble in the busy city. Nia looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Then slowly, she placed her small gloved hand in his. Can we go back now? She asked. It's getting cold. Julian's fingers curled gently around hers, careful and protective. Yes, sweetheart. Let's go back. As they turned to walk together, Nia's grip tightened slightly on his hand. It wasn't forgiveness or acceptance, not yet. But it was a beginning, as delicate and full of possibility as the snowflakes falling around them. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Julian helped Nia from the car. She wore a simple blue dress she'd picked out herself from a department store, her hair neatly braided but without fancy ribbons or clips. Julian had suggested they visit his usual tailor, but Nia had shaken her head, saying she liked this dress better. Now, watching her smooth it carefully with small hands, he knew she'd been right. Inside the imposing building, their footsteps echoed on the marble floors. Julian noticed Nia's shoulders tense as they passed through security. He slowed his pace to match hers, resisting the urge to rush ahead as he usually did in buildings like this. Are you okay? He asked softly. Nia nodded, but her fingers twisted the hem of her dress. There will be lots of people watching us, won't there? Yes, Julian answered honestly. But remember what we talked about? Just focus on being yourself. That's all anyone needs to see. They found Karen Holt waiting outside the courtroom, her familiar clipboard tucked under her arm. She smiled warmly at Nia before giving Julian an approving nod. Good morning, you two. Reverend Green and Mrs. Finch are already inside. The courtroom felt bigger than Julian, remembered from his business dealings. Wooden benches stretched out behind them, already filling with observers. He recognized Vernon Brooks sitting with his lawyers on the other side, their suits crisp and expensive. Julian deliberately turned away, focusing instead on helping Nia settle into her seat. Eleanor Finch was the first to testify. The elderly pianist walked slowly to the witness stand, her white hair catching the light. I knew Lillian Brooks for 15 years. She began, her voice quiet but clear. She played in our church choir every Sunday. When she was sick, she worried most about Nia's music, not just the singing, but the joy in it. These past weeks I've heard that joy returning when she sings with her father." Julian felt his throat tighten at the word father. He watched Nia's face carefully, but she was studying her hands in her lap. Reverend Green spoke next, his deep voice filling the courtroom. "I've watched Mr. Mercer learn to put his daughter first. He comes to her at her level, sitting on the floor to help with homework, learning to tie hair ribbons, listening to her prayers without trying to fix everything. That's not a man trying to buy love. That's a father learning to earn trust." Karen Holt's testimony was precise and professional. She detailed Julian's consistent visits, his willingness to follow guidelines, and his respect for Nia's boundaries. "Mr. Mercer has demonstrated unusual patience," she explained. When Nia was reluctant to call him Dad, he told her to use whatever name made her comfortable. When she wanted to keep wearing her mother's locket instead of new jewelry he'd bought, he simply asked to hear stories about the pictures inside. Finally, it was Julian's turn. He stood slowly, straightening his tie, not his usual silk, but a simple striped one Nia had pointed to in the store. The judge looked at him expectantly. "Your Honor," Julian began, then paused. The carefully prepared speech felt wrong suddenly. He looked at Nia instead. "I wasn't there when my daughter was born. I wasn't there for her first steps or first words. I wasn't there when she needed me most." His voice cracked slightly. "I can't change that. But I'm here now, and I will be here tomorrow, and the day after that. Not because a court orders it, but because that's what fathers do. They show up. They stay. They learn." He took a deep breath. "I'm not asking to replace her mother. Lillian gave Nia something precious: faith, music, strength. I'm asking for the chance to add to that legacy, not erase it. To help Nia grow into the person she's meant to be, even if that person isn't anything like me." The judge listened intently, making notes. When all testimony concluded, she spoke carefully. "This is a complex case requiring further consideration. However, based on the evidence presented and the clear priority being placed on the child's well-being, I am granting temporary custody to Mr. Mercer with continued oversight from Social Services." Julian barely heard the rest of the legal details. He felt a small movement beside him, then warmth as Nia's hand slipped into his. Her fingers were trembling slightly, but her grip was firm. They stood together as the court adjourned. Walking down the courthouse steps, Nia didn't let go of his hand. The morning sun had grown stronger, making the world seem brighter somehow. Julian matched his steps to hers, no longer leading or following, but walking beside her as they made their way forward together. The morning sun painted gentle stripes across Julian's kitchen counter as he flipped pancakes, stealing glances at Nia, who sat at the breakfast bar, swinging her legs while she carefully printed her homework into a fresh notebook. 3 weeks had passed since the courthouse, and their morning routine was starting to feel less like a carefully rehearsed play and more like real life. "Do you want blueberries in yours?" Julian asked, holding up the carton. Nia nodded, her braids bouncing. "Yes, please, Mr. Mayor." She caught herself, then tried again. "Yes, please, Julian." They were working on that, taking small steps. The social worker had suggested letting Nia set the pace with names, and Julian had agreed. Some days she called him Mr. Mercer, other days Julian, but each time she corrected herself felt like a tiny victory. "Did you remember to pack your gym clothes?" Julian asked, sliding a plate of pancakes in front of her. "Uh-huh. And my permission slip for the field trip." Nia carefully cut her pancakes into neat squares. "Ms. Rodriguez said we're going to the Science Museum next week." Julian checked his phone calendar, already blocking out the day. 3 weeks ago, he would have sent his assistant Miles to handle such things. Now he was learning to reschedule board meetings and delegate decisions he once would have insisted on making himself. The drive to school was filled with Nia's soft humming, another change that had crept in, gradually. At first, she'd only sung during their weekly visits to Reverend Green's church. But lately, music had started spilling into their everyday moments, while she did homework, when she helped fold laundry, as they drove through the city. "Have a good day," Julian said as Nia climbed out of the car. He watched her walk towards the school entrance, her new backpack bouncing against her shoulders. She turned once to wave, a small smile on her face. Instead of heading straight to the office, Julian drove home. His laptop sat waiting on his home office desk, but he found himself walking past it to the piano in the living room. The sheet music for Lillian's song, their song, still rested on the stand where Nia had left it after their evening practice. His phone buzzed. Miles was texting about an urgent investment decision. 3 weeks ago, Julian would have dropped everything to handle it. Now he typed back, "Proceed with Thompson's recommendation. I trust your judgment." Afternoon brought its own rhythm. Julian left work early to pick up Nia from school, listening as she chatted about her day, the art project she'd started, the new girl who sat next to her at lunch, the math quiz she was nervous about next week. "Could we practice tonight?" Nia asked as they walked into the apartment. "I want to learn the second verse." "Of course," Julian said, his heart warming at her request. "After dinner and homework?" Their evening routine had evolved naturally. Homework at the kitchen table while Julian answered essential emails. Simple dinners they prepared together. Nia was becoming an expert at measuring ingredients and setting timers. Then music practice, something they both looked forward to now. "Dear God," Nia prayed that night, kneeling beside her bed. Julian stood in the doorway, as he did every evening, listening. "Thank you for my teachers and my new friends. Please help me do well on my math quiz, and thank you for giving me a warm bed and—" She paused, then added softly, "And thank you for helping Julian find me." Later that night, Julian sat in his own room, holding one of Lillian's letters. He didn't need to read it anymore. He knew the words by heart. But something about holding it helped him reflect on how much had changed. The next morning brought rain and a slight fever. Nia's forehead felt warm, and Julian called the school without hesitation. 3 weeks ago, he would have panicked, maybe called a whole medical team. Instead, he made soup from the recipe Eleanor had taught him, set up a movie on the living room TV, and worked from his laptop while Nia dozed on the couch. She woke up in the afternoon feeling better and asked if they could just sit together. Julian closed his laptop mid-email and moved to the couch. Nia leaned against his side, humming softly. "That's a new tune," Julian noted. "I made it up," she said. "It's about the rain." The days flowed one into another, marked by small moments rather than big events. Julian learned to braid hair by watching YouTube tutorials. Nia learned to trust that dinner would always be there, slowly stopping the habit of hiding snacks under her pillow. One evening, as thunder rolled outside, Julian heard something that made him pause in the hallway. Laughter. Real, unguarded laughter coming from Nia's room. He peeked in to see her teaching her stuffed animals to sing, conducting them with exaggerated movements. She caught him watching, and instead of stopping, as she would have weeks ago, she grinned. "Want to join our choir?" "I thought the piano was more my style," Julian said, but he sat down on the floor beside her. The weekend brought a trip to the grocery store. Not a task Julian would have imagined enjoying before, but now he found pleasure in watching Nia carefully compare cereal boxes and count apples into bags. They ran into Eleanor from church, and Nia proudly showed off the new song she'd been practicing. "You're both glowing," Eleanor observed quietly to Julian as Nia examined the fruit display. "It's not about the big gestures, is it? It's about being there, day after day." Julian nodded, watching as Nia carefully selected a perfect pair. "I used to think success meant bigger, faster, more impressive. But this..." He gestured to the simple scene before them. This is what matters. That evening, as they put away groceries together, Nia started singing. Not her usual soft humming, but full, clear notes that filled the kitchen. It was Lillian's song, but somehow it didn't hurt to hear it anymore. Instead, it felt like a bridge between then and now, between what was lost and what was found. Julian sat at the piano, playing quietly as Nia continued to sing while arranging cans in the pantry. Not a performance, not a practice session, just music woven naturally into their everyday life. He realized with sudden clarity that these ordinary moments, these daily routines, this gentle stability was healing them both in ways no grand gesture ever could. The familiar melody floated through their home, no longer a reminder of what was missing, but a celebration of what they'd built together, one day at a time. The morning of the final custody hearing dawned crisp and clear. Julian adjusted Nia's yellow hair ribbon, her choice, as they stood outside the courthouse. His hands trembled slightly, but he kept his voice steady. "Remember what we talked about?" he asked gently. Nia nodded, her small fingers fidgeting with the hem of her simple blue dress. "Just tell the truth," she said, "and it's okay to be scared." Julian's throat tightened. Those were Lillian's words. He'd seen them in her letters. Nia had her mother's wisdom, wrapped in a child's innocence. Inside the courtroom, they sat together on the wooden benches. Karen Holt gave them an encouraging smile from her seat nearby. Vernon Brooks swept in wearing an expensive new suit, his lawyer trailing behind with stacks of papers. The judge, a grandmotherly woman with kind eyes and silver hair, called the court to order. "This is the final hearing regarding custody of Nia Brooks," she announced. "Let's begin with Mr. Brooks' petition." Vernon's lawyer stood, straightening his tie. "Your Honor, we intend to show that Mr. Mercer's sudden interest in the child is merely an attempt to assuage his guilt through financial means. His past abandonment—" "Objection," Julian's attorney said quietly. "Mr. Mercer was unaware of his daughter's existence until recently, as established in previous testimony." "Sustained." The judge nodded. "Please continue with current evidence only." As Vernon's case unfolded, cracks began appearing. His financial records showed recent, large debts. Text messages revealed attempts to negotiate a settlement with Julian's company before filing for custody. Most damaging were his own words, caught on a hot microphone during a break about making that rich boy pay. Nia sat, very still through it all, a small hand occasionally finding Julian's for reassurance. He noticed she would hum softly, almost inaudibly, when the tension grew thick, her mother's song a shield against fear. When Vernon took the stand, his practiced smile couldn't hide his nervousness. Under cross-examination, he stumbled. "Mr. Brooks, prior to filing for custody, when was the last time you had contact with Nia or her mother?" Vernon shifted in his seat. "Well, I sent Christmas cards." "Can you be more specific?" "I might have missed a few years." "According to records, you haven't communicated with the family in over 6 years. Is that correct?" Vernon's face flushed. "I was busy. But we're blood relatives." "Yet you made no effort to help when Lillian Brooks was ill, or when Nia was homeless." The silence that followed was deafening. When it was Julian's turn to testify, he spoke from his heart rather than the prepared statement his lawyers had crafted. "I can't change the past," he said, looking directly at Nia. "I can't undo my choices or bring back precious time, but I can be present now, every morning, every night, every ordinary moment in between." His voice grew thick with emotion. "I'm not asking for custody because I'm wealthy or powerful. I'm asking because she's my daughter, and I love her. That's all." The judge called a brief recess to review final documents. Julian and Nia waited in a small conference room, sharing a pack of crackers and trying not to watch the clock. "Mr. Mercer," Nia whispered. "Yes? If we stay together, can we still visit Mommy's grave sometimes?" Julian blinked back tears. "Of course we can. We'll bring her favorite flowers. Yellow roses," Nia said with a small smile. She said they reminded her of sunshine. When they returned to the courtroom, the judge's decision was clear and firm. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, this court finds that the best interests of the child will be served by granting full custody to Julian Mercer. She looked directly at Vernon. "Mr. Brooks's petition is denied, and given the evidence of financial motivation, this court recommends investigation into possible attempted extortion." Vernon stormed out, his lawyer hurrying after him, but Julian barely noticed. He was watching Nia's face as she processed the news, her eyes wide with a mix of relief and wonder. Outside the courthouse, away from the reporters and cameras, Julian found himself overwhelmed by everything: gratitude, joy, responsibility, love. Without thinking, he knelt right there on the steps and bowed his head. "Thank you, God," he whispered, tears falling freely now. "Thank you for bringing her back to me. Help me be worthy of this gift." He felt small arms wrap around his neck, tight and sure. Nia pressed her face against his shoulder, and her voice, the voice that had first drawn him from his car on a snowy evening, spoke the word he'd been afraid to hope for. "Daddy," she said, soft, but clear as a bell. The word hung in the air between them, precious as a prayer. "Daddy," she said again, and this time her voice held a smile. "Let's go home." The autumn morning dawned crisp and clear as Julian adjusted his tie in front of the mirror. Through the open door of his bedroom, he could hear Nia practicing scales, her voice floating up from the music room downstairs. The sound made him smile, not just because of her talent, but because of how far they'd come. "Ready for the big day?" he called out, making his way down the stairs. "Almost," Nia replied, her fingers trailing over the piano keys. She sat straight-backed on the bench, wearing a purple dress she'd picked out herself, her hair neatly braided. At 10 years old, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that reminded Julian so much of Lillian. Today marked the official launch of the Brooks Foundation, named in honor of both Lillian and Nia. Julian had spent months working with social workers, church, leaders, and community organizations to create a program that would help homeless families and children find not just shelter, but stability and hope. "You know," Julian said, sitting beside Nia on the piano bench, "we don't have to do the performance if you're nervous." Nia shook her head firmly. Mom always said music was a gift meant to be shared. She touched the small gold cross necklace that had been Lillian's. "Besides, it's our song." Julian's heart swelled. The melody that had once brought them together on that snowy street corner had become something new, not a reminder of loss, but a bridge between past and present, pain and healing. The church was already filling up when they arrived. It wasn't a grand venue, but rather the same modest sanctuary where Reverend Green had first told Julian about Lillian's faith. Familiar faces dotted the pews: Karen Holt, who'd guided them through the custody process, Eleanor Finch, who'd become like a grandmother to Nia, and dozens of community members who'd supported them along the way. "Look who's here," Eleanor called out, waving from her usual spot near the piano. She hugged Nia tight, then stepped back to admire her outfit. "Those are lovely shoes, dear." Nia beamed, showing off her practical but pretty Mary Janes. "No more bare feet," she said with a grin that made Julian's chest tighten. Those early days seemed both yesterday and a lifetime ago. As the benefit concert began, Julian watched from the piano as various local musicians performed. The Brooks Foundation's mission was presented between acts, providing emergency housing, educational support, and family counseling services. But the heart of the program was its focus on keeping families together through crisis, helping parents build the stability their children needed. Finally, it was their turn. Julian settled at the piano, his fingers finding the familiar keys. Nia stood beside him, took a deep breath, and began to sing. The melody that had once been a love song transformed into something deeper, a testimony of redemption, of love that persists even when lost, of grace that finds its way home. Julian played softly at first, letting Nia's clear voice carry the story. As the song built, he felt that familiar ache in his chest, but it was different now. Where there had once been regret, there was gratitude. Where there had been absence, there was presence. Where there had been silence, there was song. In the front row, Karen Holt wiped her eyes. Eleanor Finch smiled through her tears. Reverend Green nodded gently, his hands clasped in prayer. The entire congregation sat transfixed as father and daughter made music together, their harmony speaking of something beyond words. As Nia sang the final verse, Julian felt it, a warmth, a peace, a presence he couldn't explain but knew in his bones. Lillian was there, not as a ghost of guilt, but as a blessing. Her love had never truly left. It had simply waited for him to grow into it. The last note hung in the air like a prayer. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then Nia turned to Julian, her eyes bright with tears and joy, and whispered, "I love you, Daddy." The applause that followed was thunderous, but Julian barely heard it. He was too busy holding his daughter close, thanking God for second chances and the mysterious ways love finds its way back home. After the concert, as people gathered in the church hall for refreshments, Julian watched Nia move confidently through the crowd. She stopped to chat with Karen about school, showed Eleanor her new sheet music, and helped younger children reach the cookie tray. She was no longer the frightened girl from the street corner. She was growing into herself, secure in being loved. "The foundation will make a real difference," Karen said, joining Julian by the window. "We've already identified 20 families who need immediate assistance." Julian nodded, his eyes still on Nia. "She taught me that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of love." He thought of that first night, buying soup instead of simply handing over cash. Sometimes you have to slow down enough to see what really matters. Across the room, Nia began teaching a younger girl the hand motions to a simple song. Her patient smile, her gentle encouragement, these were Lillian's gifts living on through their daughter. And now, through the foundation, that legacy of love would reach even further, touching lives they might never meet, but could help transform. "Your life looks very different from 3 years ago," Karen observed with a knowing smile. Julian thought about his scaled-back work hours, his simplified priorities, his rediscovered faith. "It looks more like what it was always meant to be," he replied softly. The afternoon light streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the church hall in warm colors. As Julian watched his daughter share her gift of music with others, he felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. The song that had once been about lost love had become about love restored, not just between father and daughter, but in all the broken places that grace had mended. The winter evening sparkled with tiny white lights strung across lamp-posts and storefront windows, transforming the once harsh city corner into something magical. Where Nia had once stood alone in the bitter cold, hundreds of people now gathered, their breath visible in the crisp December air. Folding chairs filled the blocked-off street, and a beautiful grand piano gleamed under carefully positioned spotlights. Julian Mercer sat at the piano, his fingers moving across the keys with practiced grace. He wore a simple black sweater rather than his once signature designer suits, looking more like a father than a billionaire. His eyes kept drifting to his daughter as she prepared to sing. At 13, Nia had grown tall and confident, though she still carried the gentle spirit that had touched so many hearts. She wore a warm burgundy coat over her concert dress, her hair styled in neat braids tied with golden ribbons. Gone were the bare feet and oversized clothes of her past, but the soul in her voice remained unchanged. The Mercer Foundation's Holiday Hope concert had become a cherished tradition over the past few years. What started as a small gathering had blossomed into an annual event that raised millions for homeless families and children in crisis. But tonight wasn't about the money. It was about remembering. Julian's hands found the opening notes of that special song, the one he'd written for Lillian all those years ago. The melody that had led him to his daughter on this very corner. The audience fell silent, recognizing the piece that had become the Foundation's unofficial anthem. Nia stepped forward to the microphone, her eyes meeting her father's with a small smile. She had insisted on singing this song last, after all the carols and holiday pieces. This song, she spoke softly into the microphone, brought my daddy back to me on this street corner 6 years ago. My mama taught it to me, saying love always finds its way home. She was right. Several people in the audience dabbed at their eyes, including Karen Holt, who sat in the front row. The social worker had become like family over the years, a steady presence in their journey. Beside her sat Reverend Green and Eleanor Finch, both older now, but still faithful supporters of the Foundation's mission. As Julian played the introduction, memories washed over him. That first night in the soup kitchen, the frightening custody battle, the slow building of trust. Each note carried the weight of their story, but also its joy. When Nia began to sing, her voice soared clear and strong into the winter night, carrying all the emotion her mother had once poured into these same words. The years of piano lessons they'd shared, the quiet evenings of homework and prayer, the gradual healing of both their hearts, it all seemed to flow through the music. Julian watched his daughter shine, remembering how she'd once been too afraid to sing at all. Now she stood tall, using her gift to help others find their way home too. In the audience, several families who'd been helped by the Foundation held each other close. The Mercer Foundation didn't just provide shelter, it rebuilt lives, offering education, job training, and most importantly, hope. Julian had learned that true change happened slowly, through consistent love and presence rather than grand gestures. As the song reached its bridge, Julian felt that familiar ache in his chest, not of regret anymore, but of gratitude. Lillian's wisdom had shaped their daughter into someone extraordinary. He'd finally learned to listen, not just to the music, but to the quiet voice of faith that had guided Nia all along. The Foundation's work had transformed this neighborhood. The old soup kitchen had been renovated into a community center, offering warm meals alongside practical help. The church where Nia had once sought shelter now ran a full-scale family support program. Even Vernon Brooks, who had once fought for custody, had eventually apologized, and now volunteered with their outreach efforts. Nia's voice grew softer as she approached the final verse, the one Julian had written about love being stronger than ambition. He'd been wrong about so many things back then, measuring success in dollars rather than moments. Now he understood that his greatest achievement wasn't the empire he'd built, but the relationship he'd restored. The last notes hung in the air like snowflakes, delicate and pure. Nia turned to look at her father, tears shining in her eyes, but joy radiating from her smile. The audience burst into applause, but Julian barely heard them. In that moment, father and daughter shared a look that said everything words couldn't express. Later, as the crowd dispersed and the cleanup crew began their work, Nia and Julian stood together on that meaningful corner. She leaned against him, both of them looking up at the gently falling snow. "Do you think Mama knows?" Nia asked softly. "About all of this?" Julian wrapped his arm around his daughter's shoulders, remembering Lillian's letters and her prayers for his heart to soften. "I think she knew before any of us," he replied. "She knew love would find a way." Nia hummed a few notes of their song, her breath visible in the cold air. "I'm glad you stopped to listen that day, Daddy." Julian pulled her closer, marveling at how God had used a simple melody to rebuild two broken lives. His empire of steel and glass stretched toward the sky several blocks away, but his true treasure stood right here beside him. Success had built his business, but love, patient, persistent, healing love, had rebuilt his soul. Together they watched the snow dust the sidewalk where their story had begun, the same corner where a barefoot girl's song had pierced through years of hardened ambition. The streetlights cast soft halos in the gathering dusk, and somewhere in the distance, church bells began to ring. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale.